It's the West Tigers podcast, and we're up to episode number 64. It's a Good Friday afternoon, and it's a good afternoon to Eddie Otto. Hey, Eddie.
G'day, Joel. Yeah, it's a bit of a different Good Friday. I know sometimes a lot of the pubs and stuff aren't open on Good Friday, but usually we've got a bit of football to talk about, Joel, but not the case this year.
Not the case this year, but the news that came through yesterday was that apparently, and there's a good chance that we will have the game back next month, right at the end of May. Is it too soon, do you think? It seems like it's pretty quick.
Oh, who knows, Joel? I did read that it's the first professional sporting competition in the world to organise an exact start date, or what at least Peter V'landys and co hope for. I can't answer that question, whether it's too soon. I suppose there's probably lots of hurdles over the next 6 weeks they still need to jump over to get back on the field. But, from where we were even last week, I think we were talking about, it's unlikely we're going to be back in July. Maybe the curve has been flattened to an extent and things are looking a little bit more positive. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And if you look at it from the perspective that if we can do something with the game, they may have to be a little bit innovative. I know there's been some discussion around maybe basing all the teams out of Parramatta or something like that. That they may have to do that to get the game back a little bit quicker. I think that it's a case of Channel 9 and Fox is sort of saying, well, we want the content. You've got to get moving with something. So I think there's going to be a lot of work from the NRL to make this a reality in 6 weeks. I suppose it's possible. There's just going to be a few logistics that need to be overcome. For example, if you're going to play 8 games every week on one ground, how will the surface, for example, how will it hold up if you're playing it just out of one venue? All those sorts of things would need to be taken into account. Accommodation, medical staff. What happens if a player gets a serious injury? Can they go and get a scan the next day? All that stuff that's maybe just under the surface needs to be considered.
Yeah, there's a raft of things you mentioned there. And I think I heard Wayne Pearce talk yesterday, and I think the main thing that they want to give is some hope to everyone in a starting date. All those things you mentioned about how the competition's going to look, where they're going to play, I don't think they know themselves yet. But I think what they're looking for is to maybe in 2 or 3 weeks get all the NRL teams back being able to train. Players can get in that mindset that they know they're going to play in 6 weeks. It gives fans something to look forward to. But they were light on details yesterday, Joel. I even heard James Graham talk saying the players hadn't even signed off the RLPA on this May 28 start. So I think maybe, I don't know whether they jumped the gun, but I think they just wanted to put something there in concrete. But there's going to have to be, a lot discussed, because I've heard 1,000 different ways they want to put this competition together. I don't know if you think the most logical one seems like to play every side once, whilst keeping your points. I think it'd be ludicrous to wipe off the first 2 games. The teams that are undefeated would be livid about that proposition.
Well, we're sitting on the fence, you and me, because the Tigers we won 1 and lost 1. So we've got nothing to gain or lose, really. Cronulla fans are saying, no, it shouldn't count at all. Let's start from zero. But I think, play everybody once. I think it has to be a new competition, personally. I think that there were different circumstances at the beginning of the year. If you really want whatever competition we have to have as much credibility as possible, so maybe a fresh start is just the way to go. Consider those 2 earlier games as extended trial matches.
Well, I get what you're saying, but it's a big call. There's would have been guys that made their NRL debuts in those games, and guys with their first wins, and Parramatta and Newcastle, big starts to the season. So, logically, it makes sense if you're going to go back from 24 to 16 rounds that you scrap and start again. But I think they're going to struggle to get that off the ground. What do you think about venues? Do you think, with this sort of coronavirus thing changes every week, the rules with government and restrictions? So do you think it'd be easier to base teams in the one place, a Parramatta or a Penrith, or do you think maybe some of the teams in Sydney will be able to play at their home grounds and go back home at night?
Well, I suppose that is a possibility. I would think that Homebush would be the perfect precinct to do it, because you've got those hotels there. You've got athletics grounds and other sorts of facilities around ANZ Stadium. So I would think that would be an ideal place. We could sort of quarantine that area off. Is that a logical, possible scenario? I don't know, but that to me would seem like a better place rather than a Parramatta, which is you go downstairs in the hotel and you're in the street, and there's restaurants and things like that. and general, there is going to be some general public around. I can't, in my mind, see a Parramatta scenario that's not sort of completely isolated from society. Whereas Homebush, I think Homebush would make a good option. Look, we'll know more hopefully in a couple of weeks where they launch a plan. There's a lot of questions still remain to be answered, but if we can get it back May 28th, that's enough season there to make it credible. Is probably the most important thing. Anything more, once you start getting past that date, you start to get a pretty short season, because I don't think we can play into October and November. I think it's just going to get too warm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know Channel 9, they actually fired a few shots at the NRL yesterday. They were really upset that not only about the hundreds of millions of squandered dollars over the years, but the fact that they were seemingly left in the dark about the formatting of the competition. I don't know how much say they should have in it, but as major, stakeholders and the guys that are pouring the money into it. So that'll be an interesting development to see if that goes nuclear, the relationship between Channel 9 and the NRL. But I actually read that Channel 9 were they would have saved 150 million if the NRL didn't resume at all this year. So whether they want a reduced competition with no crowds, which is arguably an inferior product, that'll be an interesting one. But I suppose the teams in Sydney, I think it won't be too bad for you. You wonder whether teams from Melbourne and Queensland want to come down and spend, might be 3 or 4 months or a couple of months playing games in Sydney alone, or there might be a scenario. I didn't mind the 2 conference thing. I've always wondered about that in rugby league, about playing more local derbies and splitting up in conferences a bit like the NFL. And maybe you could have 8 teams in Sydney and the Queensland teams plus maybe a Melbourne and Canberra and Warriors based up in Townsville or something.
Yeah, I think that's a very real possibility. And instantly, as soon as you've divided the players in half, you've got half as many players, and you've got half as many risks. Because if one player, say a Canterbury player, is infected, you're going to infect everybody potentially. Whereas if you're splitting them up and keeping them divided by 1,000 Ks or 2,000 Ks in a Townsville or somewhere like that, I think that would make good sense as well. So yeah, it could end up being a pretty good competition. Because if you look back to 1997, the ARL competition was actually a pretty darn good competition, because it was pretty much local derbies every week, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I was going to say, Joel, I was only 11 or 12, but that was one of my favourite years following. It was Balmain back then, and I think there were 8 or 10 weeks in a row whether you're either playing at Leichhardt or the SFS, and you could go to every game, and the crowds were good because the rivalries were there. And that's something that's been, diluted a bit by the fact that there's not as many of those rivalry games at suburban grounds. So maybe that could work. Obviously, crowds probably unlikely this year. Joel, do you think we get to a point where we can get crowds back at all? Or do you think it's going to be a write-off this season?
I think that the health authorities will be pretty conservative about getting 20 or 30 or 40,000 people together in one spot. I think that's probably a given that we may not see crowds this year.
Okay. I was going to say, I think Origin will probably be the thing that suffers most, and I think the NRL will sort of get used to watching games with no crowds, and the players will get used to it. It would have been a very strange feeling the first time up, but 5-6 rounds in, little things that are enjoyable is getting to hear a little bit more of what the players say on the field and how they talk. But I think, given Origin's the jewel in the crown, that might be something that suffers this year without a crowd. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. You take Origin, you take the crowd out of Origin, it does take a lot out of the spectacle. So, as I said the other week, I'm not fussed if they cancel the State of Origin this year. I think just stick to the fundamentals. I know that it's a big money spinner. Obviously, that's the main point of everything, is you've got to keep the money coming through. And Origin is a big money spinner for the NRL. But I think that we're in such a dire sort of position that just get the fundamentals and just start off simple and get the competition back and see where we go. So, look, they'll make a decision around that regardless of what I say. But I would say just get the competition back in some sort of form, and most people would just be happy with that. If there's a year without Origin, I don't think too many people would be too upset.
Yeah, and I think dire is a good word. And I heard a couple of different viewpoints. I heard, Cameron Smith again. He was sort of, when they mentioned this potential bubble in Sydney, he was saying, well, I don't want to spend more than a couple of weeks away from my family. But then Josh Hodgson, on the other hand, he said, well, he didn't compare it to world wars or anything, but he said, they could be talking about this in 50 or 100 years' time, that we were maybe placed in this bubble for 3 or 4 months, and we were players that were responsible partly for saving the game of rugby league. So I think
Exactly.
I quite enjoyed his take on it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices, and obviously there are players with partners that are about to have babies and they've got little children and that type of thing. But there's plenty of other guys that go off and serve in Afghanistan for 3 months, and it's just the way the world works. Sometimes you have to take one for the bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, it's and guys at different stages of their career. I mean, Cameron Smith would have earned a lot of money out of the game, and will get a good job outside of the game, I'm sure, with the media or whoever coaching afterwards. But you've got young guys there on 70 or 100 grand that want to get another contract out of rugby league, who'll be doing anything to get back on the field. And I don't know. I think with Peter V'landys in charge, Joel, he's not a guy who's a populist. He's not afraid to get things moving and upset a few people. And I've actually, I know he runs Racing New South Wales, and racing's basically gone on unaffected in the past few weeks. They've copped some criticism for that, but I think he might be the guy that rugby league has needed for a while. Time will tell that.
Time will tell. We'll watch and see, and we'll talk about it as it comes through. I think we need to move on to West Tigers talk. Of course, there's been no real news, but what we thought we'd do is put our business plan for West Tigers 2025 together. And before we share our thoughts and have a bit of a debate about that, but we go back to our Facebook followers, and a few people have had their say. So if I hit the share screen button, this should work. And I have to press that button there. There we go. So Peter Boland, Eddie, he said, for starters, we want one home ground. I'm sure we'll talk about home grounds in a few moments' time. I asked which preference, what ground would be your preference, Peter? And Peter said Campbelltown. Glenn Fegan said Leichhardt, 100% best ground in the world. Joshua Burnell was waving the flag for ANZ Stadium. Of course, ANZ Stadium, that's another thing that needs to be considered, even with the competition, talking about, as I was saying, quarantining into that Homebush area. ANZ Stadium is set to be demolished or partially demolished from around the middle of the year after State of Origin. So I guess that could be another factor in all of that. Lisa Stanaway said, I'm thinking there will have to be some form of Super League once this COVID stuff is over, as I can't see the game being sustainable in its current form. Hopefully West Tigers can survive the cull. I'm sure we will. Nick McGrath finals appearances would be ideal, given these coming years should be Brooks' best. I'd love to see him elevate and dominate games. If he doesn't, it'd be hard to see us hitting the next level. Patrick Padgen, passion and consistency. Here, Patrick. Too many players are on 1 week and off for the next 3. Definitely need a stable home ground. Where that will be is open to conjecture. It's 100% true. Jonathan Fleck says, where's Gus? I don't know if he means Phil Gould, but anyway, I don't think Phil's been on the radar in any way. Stephen Rental, in 2025, Coach Benji steers Tigers to premiership. Captain Billy Walters, named man of the match and Clive Churchill medalist. That's a very interesting post, Stephen. I wonder if Benji will ever end up in coaching. That would be an interesting scenario. And last one, David Farrell said, only have our traditional 2 grounds at Leichhardt and Campbelltown be a glamour club. People want to join, not pay overs for players. So there you go. Thanks everybody who had their say on West Tigers 2025. Eddie, Benji Marshall coach 2025?
I wouldn't have predicted someone like Benji would go into coaching. I think he might be a specialist coach. I think he's a guy who'll want to stay involved with West Tigers. I think it's heart and soul for him now, given the way he's come back. And I can't ever see him being a head coach, but he's certainly a leader, and he's very good in the media. He's a natural there. I think he'll do a bit of everything, Joel. I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a skills coach who stays in the media.
Yeah, I think definitely the media is calling for Benji. He's a good operator. What I like about him and what I've noticed is the regard that the other players seem to have for him. If you look at post-match, there's always players that are lining up, pat him on the back, shake his hand, and they seem to have such a lot of respect for him, which is fantastic. As much as you want to talk about what a player's achieved, what kind of person they are, I think he's ticked a lot of those boxes, and he's set himself up pretty nicely as a person, as a family man, and as no doubt a media person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see him on Instagram. If you see his stories on Instagram, he's got his little little kid on there every day at the moment. Obviously in lockdown, I think his name's Fox Marshall. So look out for him in another 15, 17 years, Joel.
Yeah. Let's hope he plays for the Tigers, not like some of the other greats who've got sons running and playing for other teams. All right. 2025, Eddie. Let's do you first, because we did me first last week. What's your business plan for 2025? Where do you want to see the West Tigers? What do you want to see us doing and achieving?
Okay, well, I started off sort of at the structure at the top. I'd like to see Michael Maguire and Justin Pascoe still there in 5 years' time, because I think, you know, the good clubs with the Trent Robinsons and Craig Bellamy's, and when, you know, Wayne Bennett was at Brisbane, they built something that was sustainable, and I think the West Tigers, we need that. We've got the coach there now, and I think Justin Pascoe has had some rough moments, but I think he's also achieved, got some things done through some fairly murky times, and I think if that relationship is strong at the top, I think that would be great, because we've had a big turnover of CEOs and coaches, and new plans thrown out, and rosters sort of taking on a different shape. And if you were to say to me those guys were there in 2025, it would mean for me that we've had success. So I'll start with that.
Okay, I think that's fair enough. I think stability is important, getting the right people in the right seats. And I think despite the fact that we've questioned a few things that Michael Maguire has done, I think that I'd like to see him hang around for quite a while. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I've gone with the home ground ones is a tricky one, because I sort of flipped and flopped on it last year as it is. And it'd be interesting now when this sort of correction of the game, with maybe money coming out of the game, what happens to some of these big projects out at ANZ and whether that happens. But I know Peter Volandi's, a bit of his mantra when he came in, Joel, was to sort of change tact a little bit and get these suburban grounds upgraded so they can become maybe not as good as Bank West, but grounds that you have really modern facilities that you enjoy, or the broader range of fans enjoy going to. So I would like to see. I can't nominate a home ground, because one home ground, because I just think it's like you said, you read out those 3 or 4 sponsors on Facebook and you got 3 or 4 different answers just in those 4. It was Leichhardt, Campbelltown, or ANZ. So I'd like to see our 2 suburban grounds, Leichhardt and Campbelltown, upgraded, maybe to 25,000 seat stadiums, and play 6 games each there every week, every season. Sorry.
So you've gone back to square one, back to where we started.
Yeah, I have, and I might change my mind again, but. Yeah, just Bank West. It didn't feel like home last year. So I may change my mind again. But if we had our own Bank West, Joel, at Leichhardt and Campbelltown, it wouldn't even be an argument, would it?
No, it wouldn't be. But I just don't know if that's ever going to happen, especially at Leichhardt. Leichhardt is never going to be redeveloped to that sort of. It'll always be a boutique ground. Campbelltown, all the scope, all the potential in the world, and the MacArthur should have a proper stadium. It should have a stadium that's at that level or thereabouts. That's for sure. But I don't think we'll ever have more than about 16,000.
Okay. We'll see. And then I've got number 3. I've just got build a premiership roster. I don't think we've had a premiership roster since probably 2010, 2011. I thought in 2016 we had the makings of one with, Moses, Brooks, Tedesco, Aaron Woods and those guys, Josh Adokar. And then we spent the last few years sort of with journeymen and hanging on and playing tough, but with sides, to be honest, that are not capable of winning a premiership. So I think over the next 4 years, we've got to be a lot more selective with recruitment. We've got to try and maybe buy an origin player or 2, maybe develop an origin player or 2. That's been a big thing that's gone missing, junior development. That's one thing that'll get, coaches sacked, is if you don't have good players, if you don't have a good roster. They're the main thing. You could be the best or worst coach in the world, but if you don't have a quality roster, it's always going to be an uphill battle. So I think we need to still improve our roster, because even though there's been some progress this year, I don't think this side's capable of winning a premiership.
No, not without some more development. I think most people would agree with that. What else you got on the list?
I just got sort of build the brand sort of thing again. I think Steve Noyce mentioned in 2005 we could be the Man United of the National Rugby League, which we could have, because like you said, the Tigers brand is so strong. The fan base is so big. It's obviously gone a little bit underground given the lack of success, but we're top 3 in ratings on TV. We still pull good crowds. We've got great colours. I just think, it's capable with success and winning, building that brand, and that would come through things like the Centre of Excellence. I think hoping once that gets done, I don't know if that's affected by what's going on in the world at the moment, but if that can get done in the next 2 years, I'm sure that will help recruit more quality players and just help everything in terms of training at better facilities and junior development and whatnot. So, and the Leagues Club, West Ashfield, that's been a pillar of strength the last couple of years, hopefully something at Rozelle. So just building our club up to be a powerhouse in Sydney.
Yep. Okay, excellent. And anything else?
Not particularly. Just put no more splurging on journeymen. I think we've done that a couple of times. I suppose just a short-term goal. 2025. It seems like a long time away at the moment. We just want to be. I'm sure we will be, Joel. But let's hope. Assuming there was no football this year, we just want to be in the competition next year and alive and well as a club. There's been a lot of doomsday predictions about the NRL if there was no football this year.
Yeah. Oh, look, I'm sure that the West Tigers will be fine, especially if we've only got to make it till the 28th of May, and then at least some money starts flowing and the TV ratings and everything, because you've got to have a product to sell. You've got to have something out there. And, hopefully, that's all comes together nicely. That's it for your 2025 business plan.
That's about it, Joel. It's your turn now. What have you got? Have you got something that I left out? I'm sure you've got plenty there. I
think I may have found the solution to the home ground issue. It's not perfect. It's not ideal, but it's something that maybe we could work towards. So we've got two very separated areas, Campbelltown and Leichhardt. They are physically, they are a long way apart. There's a lot of civilization between them. They've got their own areas and their own strengths and weaknesses and all of that. What I would be proposing would be 4 or 6 games a year, maybe 3 each at each venue. We have a rugby league festival. So, like the old days of turning up at midday, you'd watch the President's Cup, and you'd watch the reserve grade, and then you'd watch the first grade. I'm proposing that you play all your junior tournaments in the morning, then you play your Canterbury Cup game, and then have big screens, and the people that are there for the tournament or festival can then watch the West Tigers on the big screen, playing in their pristine home ground, the home ground that we play in every week, which is the redeveloped ANZ Stadium.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never thought of it. It's a little bit left field, but big screens at Campbelltown and Leichhardt, you're saying like on the same day or wherever? So that'd be involving what, West and Balmain sort of Harold Matthews and Jersey Flegg sort of teams and Canterbury Cup.
Yep. And then on the big screen, you can watch the game from ANZ Stadium. And essentially, it gives the people in Campbelltown to get out to see plenty of rugby league. It gives the people to come to Leichhardt, which is what people love. They get to buy their hot dogs and have their chips and have their beer and then sit and watch the game on the big screen. I just think that the way the game is and the way the world is, I just don't know if we can provide the corporate facilities at Leichhardt and Campbelltown without massive injections of money. I just can't see the money around. At ANZ, you've got the guaranteed advertising, you've got the places, the corporate sponsorship boxes, you've got the facilities. It's going to be a completely different stadium. I was looking at the plans again and looking at what they're going to be doing. 77,000. I know it's still it's going to be a pretty big place, but it's going to actually be a rectangle, so you can get in nice and close to the action. You don't have to use those top tiers, because the problem with ANZ as it is now is it's not just that you've got all those tiers above you that are empty when you've got 12,000 people. It's that the 12,000 people are so far away from the action. So if they do bring that in and you have that closer to the action, option with that ground, I think it's going to make it a completely different place. And you're going to have things like the giant screens and that type of thing. I just think if you're going to be a big club, we want it to be a big club. We need to be in the big ground, and we need to have the best of the best.
I understand your argument, and Canterbury and South pretty much did the same thing, and they've had varying levels of success. And I still know South Sydney fans don't love it, but they've probably got used to it, and success on the field. They still get big crowds there, even though it doesn't look huge. They still get crowds of over 25,000 for some of their big games at ANZ. I think it would be the move, if you were going to have one ground, it would be the least controversial place to
Yeah.
go to. Because if obviously you went to Campbelltown or Leichhardt, then you'd ostracise half of the fan base. You went to Bank West, you got people talking about Parramatta's ground. So New Sydney Football Stadium, if it ever becomes more than a pile of dirt, Joel, could be interesting, because that, I think they might scale down that development and make it like a Bank West in the city. I know it's, again, not really our area, but that could be another ground that comes into play in a couple of years. It's an interesting suggestion that you thought about the big screens. Obviously, it wouldn't be possible all the time. Say the West Tigers had a Thursday night games, and but it was a few times a year on a Sunday. I understand what you're saying.
Yep. I just think it's a way of still having rugby league in those areas. You might make a commitment that you play a trial match at Campbelltown and a trial match at Leichhardt every second year, that type of thing. But you could really have it. It'd be like a traditional day at the football. The only difference is the main game, you watch it on the big screen. I think there is a bit of merit to those sorts of ideas. You can have things like your membership opportunities and all of that, and promotion of the club. And that probably might work in that more intimate environment rather than an ANZ stadium. So I think there's something that maybe that could be investigated. Moving on to the rest of the business plan, I still think, as I've said before, I think having 15,000 odd members is I think it's inexcusable. I think a club of this size with this many followers should have 50,000 members. I think that we should be aiming for 50,000 members by 2025, because I think it's possible. You've got 200,000 people, plus more than 200,000 people who follow West Tigers and like West Tigers on Facebook. You only have to convert a quarter of those people to be members. Surely that could be possible. We should have the biggest, one of the top 2 or 3 biggest membership bases in the game. Much more. I think that's 15,000 is just not big enough.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. And you look at, I suppose, the NRL's biggest rivals, put them in the shade in that regard. Some of the big clubs in Melbourne for the AFL have got, Richmond's just, I think, broken 100,000 members, and they're the Tiger brand in Melbourne, which was starved of success for 20 years, but still had big, like over 50,000 members, and it's exploded. Now they've won a couple of competitions. But yeah, that's what you said there. Doesn't just go for West Tigers, it probably goes across the board. I think we'd probably be 8th or 9th in members in terms of numbers purely. We'd be ahead of some clubs, I think, like Cronulla and Penrith and teams that have had more success than us. But like you said, I think that's a strength of any club, is to have more members, and we probably do, according to the numbers. Whoever does these numbers have maybe the 2nd or 3rd or 4th most fans in the country. So maybe it's time to think of better ways of engaging and reaching those fans. Yeah,
maybe it needs a rethink. This is probably an opportunity to start to rethink it. We've had this period where the game's been on hold. We're going to have to get people back to the game, get people interested. I think that it's a great opportunity to introduce new things and new thoughts and new ideas, not just for the West Tigers, but for the game. A couple of other things on my list for the business plan. Really strong pathways, so junior pathways, really getting those pathways up there with the best in the game, to make sure that we've got the young talent coming through from places like Campbelltown, the Macarthur and the Inner West. And I really want to see a more inclusive relationship with West Campbelltown. I think that's absolutely vital. I think that I don't have the 100% facts of the politics involved, but I would really love to see West Campbelltown being part of the West Tigers and contributing more and being included into what we're trying to do with this club.
Yeah, well, would only make the club stronger. We've got West Ashfield obviously leading the way, but seems like they're sort of been on different paths, West Ashfield and West Campbelltown, and we've lost that a chance there for money to come in and maybe some more juniors. I think they've sort of turned their attention with sponsoring maybe the new soccer side, so it's been a bit of a shame. But and then maybe what can happen out at Rozelle. It's been an eyesore, Joel, for 10 or 15 years there. You would have probably remembered back in the day the old Balmain Lease Club, and people miss that. And to have that come back in some form as a West Tigers Lease Club would be exciting.
You're probably too young to remember this, Eddie, but there used to be a great Chinese smorgasbord at Balmain Leagues Club in the main dining room. After a game at Leichhardt, you go back there and yeah, you remember that?
No, I don't. I didn't actually. I might have had a schnitzel or something there a few times, but I spent, probably I was 18, 19 when it was 2005-06 when the Leagues Club was still open, and actually went there, Joel. I went to the grand final and didn't think we'd get into the Leagues Club because Darling Street was all cordoned off. But given we were members, me and a mate got in, and that was a very memorable night being in that Balmain Leagues Club after the 2005 grand final and seeing players, dancing on the tables with the trophy, and doesn't seem like 15 years ago, but it was.
Yeah. So it's interesting. My grand final experience was entirely different. I was living and working in Brisbane, and I watched the game at home alone. So we had a completely different experience. But I'll always regret not being there, and always regret not seeing that celebration, because I lived through 88 and 89. So it would have been great to experience it.
Funny you say that, Joel, because one of the memories I have of the night of being in Balmain Leagues Club was the elation of the players was probably matched by some of those guys that played in 89. Benny Elias was the guy doing all the interviews with the players and geeing everyone up. Paul Siren was there. Gary Jack was there. All those old guys absolutely, loving it. I think for them it was probably a little bit. It wouldn't have obviously been as great as them winning that competition, but it would have been a relief to see a Tigers side, West Tigers, win that premiership.
Yeah. I've also got the Leagues Clubs on my list. So West Tigers Leagues Club at Ashfield, Brozell and Flemington Markets. I think that's a really strong footprint. And finally, just better communication from the club, as we've said before, just selling the vision more of the Q&As. I think the fans really like the Q&As, more transparency. And the last thing I've got on the list is I actually think we need a new theme song.
What is the current theme song?
So it's the remake of Eye of the Tiger.
Yeah. It's funny. They some years they tend to play that a lot, and then other years they go away from that. But I know they've got a team song. That's probably, I've seen that a few times. It's got a few swear words, and that probably could be the theme song. But it would be a bad idea after 20 years to have a new sort of song. I know, again, they're huge in the AFL. Those theme songs they belt out before and after the game, and it really gets the fans involved in the experience. And you're going to have to, people the last few months who've lost their jobs and whatnot, it's going to be hard for the NRL to try and sting them $30 or $40 to go to a game. So you're going to have to come up with some ways to make it attractive to go.
Yeah. To me, the Eye of the Tiger, as much as I like it, it is. So when we were at Balmain, and they'd always play just the standard Survivor version of Eye of the Tiger at Leichhardt, it kind of worked. It worked, but I just think that there's just no creativity there, just taking the old Eye of the Tiger. I mean, it's just so one-dimensional. I just think it would be great to start again. If you look at something like Canberra, I always talk about Canberra's theme song. I think it's fantastic. I think it's really good theme song. And Brisbane's got a good one, and a few of the other clubs have got them. And I just think we kind of, just seemed like a bit of the easy option. Maybe it's something that the club could invest in.
Yeah, I wouldn't be against that at all. I know that the Canberra one, the old Green Machine one, that's been some of the oldest ones and some of the best that you remember. Cronulla's one annoys me, that up Cronulla when they used to go to Shark Park and get beaten. I used to hate listening to that, but that's probably the worst one, I reckon.
I reckon it is. Alrighty. Yeah, that's, I think they're all pretty doable sorts of things that the club could look at. Of course, if our listeners or viewers have got any other ideas, you send in an email, feedback@westtigerspodcast.com.au, or leave a message, or leave a post on the Facebook page, or send a message through Facebook. We always want to hear from our listeners. It adds a lot to what we do, and we'll come back and we'll do something again next week.
Sounds good, Joel. Let's hope the footy's back soon.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eddie. See ya.
See you, mate. Thank you.